Oh, wrong share. There we go. Actually, we're in chapter 6, and for those of you who were here last week, um, where this is the famous Daniel in the lion's den story, and a lot of us kind of know this story from Sunday school and other sermons and everything. So, um, you know, to kind of sum it up, Daniel is thrown in the lion's den because he won't follow a law that said that you had to not make any petitions or to anybody but the king, including your own god or whatever, and so the king was actually kind of tricked into doing this because he really liked Daniel. Daniel through the night was not harmed by the lions, and then when the king came in the morning to see if Daniel was alive, and he was really praying and hoping that he was alive. He wasn't, and God delivered Daniel from the lion's den. So to kind of summarize where we are in this chapter, or actually in the book, if you guys remember from last time, the chapters 2 through 7 is what they call a chiasm, and that means like it's a parallel structure. You see this in probably most books in the Bible, where it's not necessarily that it's arranged in a chronological order. It's done where one set of things matches another set of things, and then you have a middle, kind of like if you built like a pyramid, then it would have like this pivot point in the middle of the story. So for the middle of the story of Daniel, or at least for this section of the book, which is in Aramaic, it's not in Hebrew. So the first section of the first chapter is in Hebrew, and then from chapters 8 through 12, it's in Hebrew. But for the middle section, which is kind of like sandwiched in between, there's an Aramaic section. Daniel knew Aramaic because he would have been taught Aramaic when he was in Babylon, because he was, he was groomed to be in leadership over there. But it's a language that's very similar to Hebrew compared to most languages. So there's kind of an overlap. But originally, it was written in Hebrew, and the main, if you look at chapters 4 and 5, those are the stories of the two kings, Nebuchadnezzar there in chapter 4, who raises himself up, but he also is humbled by God and he comes to know God. In chapter 5, who's actually his grandson, does not humble himself, or he does something extremely sacrilegious. He uses the the implements from the temple that were sacred items, for worship, and he has a party with them, and he does this with the knowledge of what his grandfather had gone through. So he has the knowledge that he should know that his grandfather was humbled by God, and the Daniel said, "You knew all this, and still you did all of this." So he's brought down, and I think it's sort of the apex of the story is that God is in control of all kingdoms, and he puts in who he wants and he takes out who he wants, and sometimes who we think really shouldn't be there is there anyway. Like Nebuchadnezzar, you think, well, he's not a godly man or anything. But if you look elsewhere in scripture, God even calls him his servant, and that he puts him in place. He even tells Daniel, in Jeremiah, actually, we see that God is going to raise up Cyrus, even though Cyrus doesn't know who God is, who Yahweh is. 200 years before that, or was it Isaiah prophesies, Cyrus, I've called you by name, and you are my anointed one, and I'm putting you in this place. See, I have made you successful in conquering, and he's going to be God's tool. So on one side you had Nebuchadnezzar, who was God's tool to um, to bring Israel into exile and to bring judgment on them. On the other side of things, it was God who raised up Cyrus to pave the way for them to go back to Jerusalem. So, but the idea is really that God is in control of all of these. And if you look at chapters 3 and 6, what you have is you have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's story where they won't bow to the idol, and it's going to be across from our story today, which is where Daniel won't worship the king. So they're kind of like they're parallel stories to each other, exactly. And then in 2 and 7, you have the dreams. One of them is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where he has the vision of the four kingdoms that are represented in the statue or an image. And then in the across from that, you have the four kingdoms and they're the same kingdoms, but this time Daniel's dreaming about them, and they're represented as four beasts. So chiastic structure is what this is called. So last time when we were at the end of the Belshazzar's pride, the writing on the wall story, what we found was that Belshazzar, had lost his kingdom. He actually gets killed at the end of the story. And in comes a guy named Darius. Now, if you look in the historical accounts, what's really happening is that Cyrus has already taken over. So my assumption last time was that Darius was the same figure as Darius the first, but I was completely wrong about that. So I'm going to have to correct myself. I was making that assumption, but I didn't say it exactly. I was just kind of working on that assumption a little bit, but I didn't really have much to say about it that time. So we're going to talk about, well, before I get there, let me explain something. Last time in Daniel 5, when you look at Belshazzar, Belshazzar was not recorded in history. History did not record Belshazzar. But then we found a cylinder back in the 1800s where Nabonidus had written about Belshazzar. And what it was is that Belshazzar was the king under him. Nabonidus had gone to the south, and actually he was in Arabia, but he had Belshazzar be the co-regent up in Babylon. So the way that the story of Daniel unfolds, when you read that chapter, and you look at the details, it's taking those things for granted, because that you see, for example, that at the end of it, the Belshazzar makes Daniel the third in the kingdom, right? Because he doesn't have the authority to make him second. So that makes sense. Second thing is that all his wives are there, but then it talks about the queen coming in saying, you got to call Daniel to have this interpreted, right? Well, where did she come from? She wasn't at the party, so she's brought in. It's his mom, and she was married to Nebuchadnezzar. She was Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, right? So he's Belshazzar's Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, but not from his mom's side. It's from his not from his dad's side. It's from his mom's side. And she has the experience of Daniel, and she has a lot more knowledge about this. She was kind of like back in the day, this is what happened. So that's why she kind of has the advice that she's given, and a bunch of little details, so that you can see that even though history for a long time did not see Belshazzar or who he was, later on the Bible is vindicated, and all of the details in chapter 5 make sense. So we've kind of got the same sort of scenario here in chapter 6. So the question is, who is Darius the Mede? The Mede is the same thing as a Kurd. So if you've heard of the Kurds, in Syria, they're the largest stateless group of people in the world right now, some people claim. So Kurdistan, what should be kind of like their area, their country, their nation, it's right between Iraq, Iran, and Syria. So they kind of got a rough neighborhood right there, and they're kind of displaced. But if you've ever heard of the Kurds, that's the Medes. They had a co-rulership with the Persians. Of course, the Persians are the Iranians, but the Persians became much, much stronger. And Daniel actually predicted that they would become much stronger as well. So,
Like the two horns, one being higher than the other.
yeah, so like in Daniel, in the next chapter, actually, we're going to see that. No, we're going to see that in chapter 8. Chapter 8. So Darius is actually not recorded in history, at least not by that name. Okay, and it's probably a title. So he's not to be confused with Darius the First or Darius the Great, or there's Darius the Second, and there's also Darius the Third. Those were all Persians, right? So Daniel's making it a point to tell you this is Darius the Mede. This is not one of the Persian kings. Of course, uh, Darius the Great was later. He was like in 522. This is more like 539 BC. So Daniel seems to hint that he's a co-ruler. So in two places in Daniel. First of all, it says in 531, it says, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom being about 62 years old. And then in the 9th chapter, it says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, I guess, I don't know, a descendant by descent a Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. So he was made king. He wasn't elected. Somebody put him in that place, right? So, so the fact that Darius could not revoke his own law, as we'll read in this Darius, could be an indicator of his limited power. I actually don't agree with that. But I thought I'd throw it out there because some commentators have pointed that out. But the designation, the Mede in Daniel, and I already brought this up, is that it seems to be a distinguishing title to separate him from later kings that were called named Darius. So some think that Daniel is using the name Darius as a title. In other words, Darius means he who holds a scepter. So it could be, it's the name of the, title of the king is he who holds a scepter. It could just,
that's the emblem of authority.
Yeah, right. So it's probably a title, and it's probable. I think it's most likely that Darius the Mede is the same figure as this guy in history called Gubaru. Okay, and again, later archaeological findings may have shed some light on this. So if you go to the Encyclopedia of the Bible, it tells you that like in the earliest 20th century, again, we found these cuneiform text, and it pretty much shows that it's quite probable that Darius the Mede was another name for Gubaru, and he's a governor under Cyrus, who appointed sub-governors in Babylonia immediately after his conquest. So the same Gubaru is frequently mentioned in cuneiform documents during the following 14 years as, quote, the governor of Babylon and the region beyond the river. So Gubaru thus ruled over the vast and populous territories of Babylonia, Syria, Phoenicia, and I don't know what this is supposed to be, Palestine. But Palestine didn't exist back then, as not by that name, so I'm not really sure. And his name was a final warning to criminals throughout the area. It could be, like that he's over, like what would later become Palestine, So the fact that he's even called king in the 6th chapter of Daniel is not an inaccuracy, even though he was a subordinate of Cyrus. Same thing with Belshazzar, who's called king, even though he was second ruler of the king in the kingdom under Nabonidus. So this is a common thing to call somebody a king, even if they're like a sub ruler. They're for all intents and purposes a king in that area. So anyway, that's I kind of wanted to put that in front because you're going to run to some people who are like, hey, Darius was never recorded in history. Bible's making it up, and it's like so. There you have that. Anyway, now we got that out of the way, let's start with verses 1-3. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. You're going to see the word satraps also in the book of Esther, because Esther takes place, in the Persian kingdom, right?
says Persian Media, yeah, right here in the first chapter.
Yeah. So he's got 120 satraps working for him, and over them three high officials. So Daniel is one of these three high officials. He's kind of almost second in charge, along with two other guys over this kingdom, right? So Daniel has already risen to prominence now in two world empires. Think about that. He rises to prominence in the Babylonian Empire, and now he's in retirement. He gets pulled out of retirement. He's in his 80s now, and he's set over, like, he's way at the top again, you know, in the next empire. And so one of them was Daniel, whom these satraps should give an account so that the king might suffer no loss. So Daniel is their boss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. It's not, I don't think necessarily that he's faithful to God. He was faithful to God, but he was faithful to the king. He ruled faithfully, just like he did under Nebuchadnezzar. When it came to bowing to any other god besides Yahweh, that's where he would depart from that. But otherwise, he contributed to Babylon as he's contributing to the next empire, and he's doing it faithfully.
He held his integrity all the way.
Yeah, integrity, like with God and with man, right? So they can't find a complaint or fault. They're probably going around saying, has he extorted money? It'd be easy for a governor to, or of some kind to extort money, or how politics is, and how slimy it is, right? And he's been like extremely powerful and could have gotten by with all kinds of stuff, but they can't find a complaint against him, whether from leadership or probably not from the people either. And one of the reasons that he's been put over, like in charge, and he's kind of a leftover, there were some people that Darius came in and killed. Like he killed the last king, right? But it's kind of good policy that, like, the people in that area know Daniel. They probably know some. So we're going to keep some people in place who the people can relate to. And, we put them in charge, and it kind of doesn't feel like you're like overthrowing everybody's culture and everybody's way of life. And in fact, this guy Darius and Cyrus, well, I don't know so much about Darius, but definitely Cyrus was more popular than the last Babylonian king. So even around in Babylon, so it was wiser politics, I think, on the behalf of like the Persians. So the Persians didn't try to tear you from your culture, so much. It's like, and they even let you worship your own gods as long as you acknowledge that their God was more powerful. It's kind of like that, or well, we won. That was everybody's understanding. If you're a pagan, it's like, well, that God must be more in control than my God because they're ruling now, so their gods must be greater, right? And then Yahweh would show up and he goes, no, I rule everything. And the only reason that you're even a king right now is because I let you. He showed that to Nebuchadnezzar. Darius is pretty impressed with Yahweh too. We'll find out. So no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we won't find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. So they're going to have to find a way to do this. So, and I put a sentence here that says, may it be that we can be accused of nothing but following God's law. They can't find anything wrong with him, so they're going to have to make something up. And it just shows you, like, it's the integrity that, like, we can all see modeled for us in Daniel. I also thought of this saying, and I forget, I don't even know who first said this, but it's, if you were accused of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? I've heard Pastor Bayless quote that before too. So if there's, is there enough evidence for people who you know and in your environment to say, well, um, you know, we we find, well, you know, we could accuse them of something connected to their Christianity because they'll stick to that.
Or like a way of sowing discord, sort of deal, or throwing out a stumbling block, so to speak.
You're talking about like these other officials that what they're going to do.
Oh, no, about could there be enough evidence to convict you if you're being a Christian? And then being a Christian, if someone, would purpose to make you stumble and fall, it would be,
Right. If they're going to accuse you of something, you know, it's either got to be false or it's got to be true, but in a way that like shows that you're actually loyal to God, you know, which is what happens here with Daniel. So verses 6 through 7. Then these high officials and satraps came in agreement to the king and said to him, "Oh, Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom and the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors are agreed. Well, all except for their boss. You know, they pretend that like they're kind of like going to imply that Daniel came up with this. So it's just like everybody under Daniel is planning this, but Daniel's not part of this meeting, is he? You know, it's like all his subordinates got the memo, but he was left out of this. But they're presenting this to the king like all of us have decided this. You know, we're of one mind. That the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except for you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. So you're not allowed to ask anybody anything, including your own god or whatever, except for the king. In other words, it's going to put the king in a position that he provides for all your needs. You know, it's kind of like talk about like big brother, kind of like government. You know, it's like I provide the food, I produce, you know, it's like you want anything, you have to ask me because nobody else can give this to you, right? And he's only going to do this for 30 days because, you know, like in other words, you don't have to give up your religion. You just have to not practice it for 30 days, right? Kind of like, you know, 30 days to, and, you know, so, you know, it's just kind of like, don't worry, you can still hold on to your religion. It's just, you can't really do your practices for this day because we have this thing going on, you know. Think about this. Well, in any case, this is a smear campaign, and it's always about power. So it's just ugly politics the way that you always see it. It's including the U.S. and because we're living in Babylon. One of the things that you see in well, the main thing about Babylon in the Bible is that Babylon is sort of an archetype. Well, it is an archetype. That's why you got like Mystery Babylon. It builds up, but it goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel. It goes back to the Tower of Babel. Babel is the same word as in Hebrew as it's Bavel. You know, Bavel. It's Babylon. It's the Tower of Babylon. We translate it differently just so that we can have in English the connection with, you know, talking Babel and confusion but it's the same exact word in Hebrew. It's Bavel, right? Tower of Bavel, and it's a city that was founded by Nimrod, you know, and there's all these connections to it, and it becomes an archetype for the system of this world. So I heard one preacher say that Babylon is man's organization against or without God. So it's like man organizing, it's politics, it's just it's the culture. It's like we're going to get together and make a name for ourselves, like they did at the Tower of Babel, and we're going to do it our own way. You know, it's either in the face of God, or like at the Tower of Babel, it's like before God, or it's in his face, you know. And it's the it's the it's the system, it's the world system basically. We're going to figure out how we can get together and do this, you know. And so, and it leads to corruption every single time. It doesn't matter what country.
It's a pattern since.
It's a pattern since the beginning of time, and we think we're going to do it different this time. You know, and there's better ways to do it, and there's worse ways to do it for sure. You know, but there's always that tendency. You know, if a country does not acknowledge God or loses their acknowledgement of God, it's only a matter of time before they'll decline. And who was it? Jefferson that said this: the Constitution is only good if it's followed by people who acknowledge God. You know, and it doesn't matter how good the system is. It's, you know, you don't acknowledge God, and sooner or later you're going to fall down. And in the Bible, Babylon Jerusalem is actually portrayed as Babylon. It becomes Babylon. That whole system. You read, you know, like in the Mystery Babylon, you have all these hints that it includes a city like Jerusalem. That whole that has all the blood of the prophets and the saints. That was explicitly Jerusalem. It has all these things that, you know, like the kings and the chariots and everything. All these things that Solomon did.
Like in the Gospels too, I think Jesus says that the prophets are sending, you know, the prophets
Yeah.
that are sent to you, kind of thing. You know?
Yeah.
Not in those exact words.
Right.
But
Jesus, yeah. In the next chapter, in 7, you're going to see kind of like we're going to cover a thing where Jesus basically calls the Pharisees and the people at his mock trial the beast. You know, they've kind of become Babylon. And it's a different part, but we'll get there. So if they're doing this out of self-interest, and it's not for the interest of the king, and it's not for the interest of the people. It's like they want their own power. It's all about power. So no good deed goes unpunished, and no good person gets unattacked. You know, you try to live an upright life in politics, you are going to get attacked. So who's the only person not invited to this meeting? Of course, it's Daniel. And the rule of law, of course, is good and necessary, but evil politicians, and you see this all the time, they'll abuse the laws and they'll use it against the innocent. You know, and
exempt themselves and
yeah, or they'll write laws in a way that will attack the people that they don't like. You know, or they'll use it and they'll abuse it, and you know, they'll put in institutions or whatever. You know, laws are pushed and passed, and then they get abused. So we're seeing like things as they've always been, I guess. So verses 8 and 9. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the injunction. So here the king is not above the law. He's in charge. If it was Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar found out that like they tricked him or something, he just put them to death and like forget, you know, Daniel, don't worry about it. You know, so I mean, Nebuchadnezzar would have done whatever he wanted to, right? You know, but this is the Medes and the Persians, and they you see this in Esther too. The law of the Medes and the Persians, once he signs it, the king signs it, it can't be revoked, even by the king.
Yeah,
he can't change it. Yeah. Same thing with like, who we translated as Xerxes in the book of Esther, Ahasuerus or whatever his name is. He can't do it either. So, but long before the Medes and Persians were ever on the map, the laws, the Jews had a law that the king was not supposed to be above the law either. So in Deuteronomy 17, it says, when he sits on the throne, so this is before they've even gone into the promised land, right? They're about to go in with Joshua, or Deuteronomy 17. Yeah, this is before well before they go into the promised land, and well before they have a king. So when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests. In other words, the priests had to approve, like the laws that the king was writing. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes, and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. In other words, you can't think that you're better than your Jewish brothers, even if you're king. You think that you're so much better than, you're a junior in high school now, and you're looking down at like the freshmen. You know what I mean? Like just that little change, and you think you're it. Let alone if you've all of a sudden been like propelled into kingdom. And you see this with athletes or whatever, 19 years old, and you get like a $30 million deal or whatever, and all of a sudden it just goes to people's heads, like that sort of thing. But even as a king, you're not supposed to like think of yourself better than the brothers. You're ruling them as a shepherd, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Of course, they didn't keep to this. Yeah, so just go down this hall. It'll be the first door on the right. So when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. So the way that this is written almost sounds like, well, when he hears the document signed, he goes straight up and does this, right? So it's almost like he's not just unmovable. Well, I'm going to do this anyway. It's like,
look at me.
Yeah, he's just like, okay, well, I am going to, I'm just, look at me. I'm just going to pray, and I'm not budging, So he was deliberate, So Daniel seems to have his house even built with Jerusalem in mind. So like he's a government official. He's got the top chamber with the windows facing Jerusalem. He's probably got together with the architect, make sure it faces this way, and
I was gonna say, but in that area, even still today, most of the roofs in those areas,
the face west,
are the playground areas. So it's not uncommon for people to meet on the roofs. We don't have it in our culture, but in there, they still have that area.
Well, I don't know if he's on the roof. It says
but
here.
They have those areas.
Yeah, they do. He's in his upper chamber, his windows. So he's inside a room. Yeah, he's inside. He has windows in his upper chamber, but people can see him. So this is something that he did very publicly. Now, there's no law that says that you had to do this, right?
No.
So this is, I think it's a common practice even for many Christians to pray 3 times a day. We do that with our meals. So a lot of people just, 3 times a day we'll pray for our meals or whatever, because we eat 3 times a day. There's been a long-standing tradition, both with Jews and Christians, 3 times a day, right? But we actually probably get that from Daniel, not the other way around. So 3 times a day. The other thing is that it's towards Jerusalem, which is another thing that like Jews is, still do to this day, like Orthodox Jews and certain sects of Judaism, but like there's a rich history of praying towards Jerusalem as well. So and this goes back probably to 1 Kings 8 when Solomon dedicated this temple. He says, when your people Israel defeated before the enemy because they've sinned against you, which is what happens with which happened with Babylon, right? And if they turn again to you to acknowledge your name and pray and plead with you in this house, says in this house, in this case, then hear from heaven, forgive their sins, etc. And then he says here, when heaven is shut up and there's no rain because they had sinned against you, if they prayed towards this place. So I think he's kind of saying this poetically, in this house, toward this place. How can you be in this house if you need to be brought again to the land? So you're not obviously not in the house, but it's kind of like like those, like you have in Proverbs, like where you have these kind of kind of parallels of statements. But the point is basically there was an idea that, hey, he's in exile, the people have sinned, and he's praying towards Jerusalem. There's a connection that he has with the temple, even though the temple is destroyed. And I think it's a kind of faith, God, I believe that your temple is going to stand again, and that you're going to bring us back. It's a prayer of exile, right? And it's a position of exile.
I think it just came to mind right here. In Jeremiah 17:12, it says, "A glorious high throne from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary." It made me reference to like God in the sanctuary.
Yeah. Well, it's actually like, so if you go back, to this, it's kind of like you have the home, which is the temple, right? But he says, then here in heaven, when heaven is shut up, then then here in heaven and forgive their sins. So there's an idea there that like there's always that idea that you have the heavenly temple. In a way you could look at it like the temple on earth was almost like an embassy, or the other way around. Like that, like in Revelation when you see the tabernacle and heavenly temple that they're doing, and then you have angels that are dressed up like priests and carrying on like priestly kind of duties in heaven. You almost get like that's earth's representation in heaven, and we have the vice versa sort of thing. But it all connects with like God being with his people, and us being with him. So there's a little bit of that in that language, but we won't get into that right now. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before God. So they're like, we caught you. Then they came near, they go to the king and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, will be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah. So this isn't Daniel, you're one of the guys who's like under your command, who serves you faithfully. Now they're going like Daniel the Jew, they're like one of these exiles. And, it's just kind of like they're kind of like trying to paint Daniel as like you got to look down on this guy, one of the exiles from Judah. They say he pays no attention to you, right? They're not talking about just like he totally ignores you, he totally disrespects you, okay? And so he pays no attention to you or the injunction you have signed. The only thing that Daniel has ignored is the injunction that he signed. And so they're like, again, they're just smearing him. He pays no attention to you. He's paid total attention to Cyrus because he's been loyal to Cyrus, and he's been extremely helpful and faithful to Cyrus, right? So now they're just going to paint him as like some guy who like doesn't even listen to the king ever or something like that, but he makes petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. He's like, I got to find a way to get Daniel out of this. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persian that no injunction or ordinance the king establishes can be changed. So they know that the king's trying to find a way out, but they're like, nope, like you're not going to get out of this. So then the king commanded Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. So the king actually had to command this. He goes, throw him into the lion's den. Which I've heard was like 15 feet down, something like that. You throw somebody 15 feet down. I don't know if they let you down with a rope, but I'm just picturing like some 80-some-year-old guy thrown 15 feet down, you know. Yeah, it's just a miracle he even, like came out unharmed just from that, you know. So the king declared to Daniel, may your God and whom you serve continually deliver you. So I would imagine that the king would have said, okay, but this guy, let him down with a rope, because he didn't have a law about, how he was let down, I guess.
And we might take this more as a prayer rather than as a curse.
What's that?
The may your God whom you serve. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It could have been.
Yeah.
Written word is always different than spoken.
Yeah.
And we change languages and everything else. So there could have been more warmth in this
Yeah.
than what is presented.
Well, we're going to find out too that he fasts, right? So it's kind of like, was he praying? And it's without saying it, it seems like
almost like a prayer.
Yeah.
Seems like
it's not something like
he
Well, but then again, think of it. He's got a petition that he signed that you can't make any petitions. So I don't know how that applies to the king or not.
Well, sometimes you have to do what you don't want to do, and he was pushed into doing it.
Yeah.
The king, I don't think it sounds like here in the New King James Version it says, and the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So he was like stuck with because his signature.
Because he had said and he had to do what he had said. But there could have been more warmth in that sentence.
Yeah. You already know that the king's heart is with Daniel.
Yeah.
If he may have deliberately not made a petition or prayed to another god, or like what would to him be another god, and therefore he does what he's left with, which is spends the night fasting. So like which is a sign of humility and also distress.
No diversions were brought to him.
Yeah, no diversions. Where he's like, I'm not gonna, I'm just going to fast, and
that bothered him.
Yeah. Verse 17, it says, and a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. So this is starting to sound familiar now. You get like the stones rolled over the tomb, so to speak, and the king sealed it. Same thing with Christ's tomb, where it was sealed. With his own signet and the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. So that's what they did. It's like a seal. Nobody's allowed to open it. We find the seal broken, then somebody's in trouble. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So he didn't sleep at all. Then at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God." So he is acknowledging that that Yahweh is the living God, despite what he may have grown up with, or has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me." It's again that angel, same thing with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Some people think maybe this is the angel of the Lord, but it could be just an angel, but again, is an angel came and shut the lion's mouth. Somebody was sent. And they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him. Okay. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. He's like, I've never done anything against you. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be brought up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him. Just like there was no smell of smoke or fire on the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, there's no kind of harm found on him because he had trusted in his God. So Daniel's deliverance is based on his trust in God, just like his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But his friends acknowledged that there was a possibility that God would not deliver them. This is up to God. And, from the fire in their case, regardless, they would be faithful to God. So whether Daniel was going to be eaten by the lions or not, he was going to be faithful to God. And in the following chapters, we're actually going to see that God does not always deliver us out of these things, because he doesn't deliver the saints from the fourth beast in the prophecy. And there are those, in the hall of faith in Hebrews 11. Some were sawn in two, others were like put to death by, like this way or that way. And but all of these share in the inheritance, because they were looking for a land that was not made by human hands. There's something beyond this life. In other words, life is worth living, but it's not worth living for. So that sounds confusing, but life is worth living because there's something bigger than life, and this life, and you can't just be living for this life, because that actually, ironically, makes it not worth it. If you can't find that thing worth dying for, you're already dead. So, and the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. So again, you have these, it's like Nebuchadnezzar. There's a little bit of Nebuchadnezzar in this guy. Nebuchadnezzar would be like, he would go like, once he was won over, then he would make a decree or something would happen, and you'd be like, okay, that's a bit. He still runs the town kind of like a hard, harsh unbeliever in a way, But there you have it. Then King Darius wrote to all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. So here you got like another just kind of like fantastic, worship of God, kind of like Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 4, right? Where Nebuchadnezzar actually has a chapter in the Bible, that he dictated or wrote. But here you've got like at least Darius has this snippet in him, or he's got a quote, that's actually kind of worth reciting. He is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion shall be to the end. Again, this is that central theme of his kingdom shall never be destroyed. In other words, God is the one who rules all kingdoms, and his is the kingdom that's never going to be destroyed. All of these other kings are going to come to the end. All of these other empires are going to fall. But God's kingdom is going to last forever.
Like chief on the summer threshing floor.
Yeah. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of King of Cyrus the Persian. So he goes. Actually, later in a later chapter we're going to see that he's directly under Cyrus. So here's some narrative connections, and I know this is kind of like one of my favorite parts, right? The lion, okay, was the emblem of Babylon. So you look at like the emblem of Babylon, you know, it's like this lion, sometimes lion with wings, right? Kind of like the first beast that we're seeing in the next chapter is going to be this lion with wings, right? It's that symbol of Babylon. So Israel had been thrown into the den of lions and brought out whole. So it's kind of like this is an emblematic story of the entire experience of Israel's exile. You know, they had been thrown to the den of lions, which was Babylon. So Daniel was at peace with the wild animals. Now this is a theme I'd like to tackle someday, but I don't, you know, I don't want to expand on it too much today. It's kind of like you have this. If you look at the visions of the new earth, you know, new heavens, new earth, it's the lion laying down with the lamb, the child being able to play with the poisonous snake and everybody. Yeah, exactly. And it starts all the way back in Eden where it's kind of implicit, you know, like that Adam is at peace there, but he's ruling over the animals. Noah ends up being, you know, in the ark with dangerous animals, if you think about it. And then we even get to like Jesus in the wilderness. In Mark's version of his being in the wilderness, it says he was with the wild animals, you know. So there's sort of like a thread there, and but I'm not going to explore that too much today. So, like Jesus, an angel ministered to him. So, like when he was with the wild animals, Jesus, you know, like after his testing with Satan, of course, you have angels come and minister to him. Daniel was thrown into a pit like Joseph. So there's a lot of overlap with the Joseph story. And then he was raised to rulership out of that. So you have there's actually a lot of connections between Daniel and the story of Joseph, you know, like where, you know, like somebody's like in exile and he goes into a pit and he becomes like second in command and all these kinds of things. So the stone, and we talked a little bit about that, the stone was put at the mouth of the quote tomb and it was sealed. But in the morning, he was found to be alive. Just kind of like if you grew up with the Daniel story and then you're reading the Gospels, you know, say like a Jew who's like reading the Gospels for the first time, you're going, wow, okay, so this is like Daniel, you know, he's thrown into like what would be his death, and then stones put in there, but then he is lifted out of that and he's found to be alive in the morning. All right. The law was satisfied when he was brought out of the tomb. Bill Randall's pointed that out, and it was so he fulfilled what was required by the law, and then he was brought out of the tomb alive anyway, which is what Christ did. And lastly, the grave in the end will devour the wicked. So, you know, that's it, guys. You got any questions or comments? Rabbit trails? We usually rabbit trail. a lot of times this is the best part. Let's see. I usually get something from Cherie, but we'll see. What do you guys think?
It's good.
I hope it's so. Next week, just to remind you, we're not going to be meeting. It's Wednesday night. It's first Wednesdays at the church, so I'll see you guys in 2 weeks, and and I'm glad that I have an extra week to study for Daniel 7, because I'll probably break that into like 2 parts or something like that, because that is one of those pivotal
chapters.
passages. Yeah, chapters, right? Son of Man episode, you know, it's
Mhm.
like the Son of Man who Jesus calls himself, goes around calling himself the Son of Man. And
Mhm.
every time he says that, it reminds you of like of Daniel,
Mhm.
and his vision there in chapter 7.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like where we're heading next week. And you've heard me talk plenty probably in the past with about Daniel 7.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Did I do a thing on Son of Man?
I don't think I was in on that Bible study.
Okay. I don't remember if I thought I may have done Son of Man, that theme. But we'll have to get into that a bit this next time.
Yeah, it's been a while, so even when you did it, you could do it for us.
Yeah. I'll dig out some old notes and brush those off.
Mhm.
Brush those off.
Mhm.
All right, guys, have a good night.
What's that? Right, yeah. Yeah, think of it, like out of all the things he could have called himself, there's something he chose to call himself the Son of Man. Son of Man. In Hebrew, it'd be Bar Adam, I guess. Son of Adam. Human, son of human. Oh, you know what I learned this week? Okay, the name Adam or human comes from Adamah, which means the earth, right?
Mhm.
The middle part of that, I think Dam means blood.
Mhm.
So there's this idea that like if you shed blood, the ground will cry out. Like man is taken up out of the ground, out of the dirt, and he's made into human. But for those who shed blood and return his life, which is like blood is life in the Bible, right? And
Right.
if you're returning that to the ground, it's like you're playing God, something like that.
Mhm.
And I was like, Dom, I had no idea that Dom means blood, but it opens up a whole thing, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, I thought for those who are interested in that. Anyway, yeah. Okay, good night, Cherie. See a note here from Cherie. And I think I'm going to stop the recording now.